Shabbat Shalom. Let's begin a little chanting, page 13. Shalom Aleichem. We'll welcome the angels in our midst. Shalom Aleichem, Malachi Asharet, Malachi Ayonemi, Melech, Malachi Amlakim, Makadosh Baruch Hu. Moachel Shalom, Malachi Shalom, Malachi Ayonemi, Melech, Malachi Amlakim, Makadosh Baruch Hu. Baruch Hu Nil Shalom, Malachi Shalom, Malachi Ayonemi, Melech, Malachi Amlakim, Makadosh Baruch Hu. Tzeichen Shalom, Malachi Shalom, Malachi Ayonemi, Melech, Malachi Amlakim, Makadosh Baruch Hu. Series of songs beginning on page 15, welcoming the Shabbat, beginning our process into prayer itself, page 15. Lechu niranena l'Adonai, nari'a letzor yishenu, nikadma fana betoda, bizmirot nari'a lo, ki al-gadol melech gadol ha'cholim asher biyado mekrayot v'tov ha'narim lo ha'asher. Orbaim shana kod bedor, va'omar am to'el levavhem, vehem lo yadu dirachai, asher nitbati v'yapim, yivon el menuchati. Page 16. Shiru l'Adonai, shir chadash, shiru l'Adonai kol haaretz, shiru l'Adonai baruch shemo, basru miyom leyom yeshuato, sapru v'goyim kevodo, b'chol ha'amim nifleotav, ki gadol Adonai. Hula me'od norahu al kol Elohim yalla la yalla la 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 yalla la 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 yalla la 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 yalla la yalla la yalla la 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 yalla la 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 yalla la 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 yalla la yalla la yalla la 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 yalla la yalla la yalla la 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 yalla la 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 yalla la 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 ya la 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 ya la 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 ya la 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 la. Yismichu hashamayim, yismichu hashamayim, yismichu hashamayim, v'tagil haaretz, yiramayam, 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 umelo, yiramayam, 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 umelo, yismichu hashamayim, yismichu hashamayim, יצמחו השערים ותגל הארץ. יעלו שדי וכל אשר בו, אז ירננו כל עצי יער. לפני אדוני קיווה לשמור הארץ, ישפוט תבל בצדק ועמים באמונתו. Page 17. אדוני מלך בקל ארץ ישמחו יראו. אדון כל הארץ כי השבעים תיקון. ורזרו על הצדיק ולשרי לב שמחה, שמחו צדיקים באדוני והודו לזכר קודשו. מזמור שיעור אדוני שיר חדש כי נפלאות עשה הושיעו ימנו זרוע קודשו הודיע. זמרה בחצרו וכושפר חניה לפני המלך אדוני ירמה ימות תדבר. לפני אדוני קיווה לשמור הארץ, ישפוט תבל בצדק ועמים במישרים. Page 19. אדוני מלך בגזו עמים יושב קרובים תנו את הארץ, אדוני בציון קדם. רוממו אדוני אלוהינו והשתחוו להר קודשו. רוממו אדוני אלוהינו והשתחוו להר קודשו. כי קדוש אדוני אלוהינו רוממו. כי קדוש אדוני אלוהינו רוממו אדוני אלוהינו והשתחוו להר קודשו. רוממו אדוני אלוהינו והשתחוו להר קודשו. We rise to page 20. מזמור לדוד, הבו לאדוני בני אלים, הבו לאדוני כבוד ועוז יעלה, הבו לאדוני כבוד שמו ישתחוו לאדוני ביראת קודש. כל אדוני על המים אל הכבוד ירים. אדוני המים רבים, כל אדוני בכוח יעלה, כל אדוני בהדר, כל אדוני שובר ארזים, וישבר אדוני את ערי לבנון, וירקידם כמו עגל לבנון וסיריון כבון רעמים יעלה. כל אדוני חוצב להבות אש, כל אדוני יחיל מדבר, יחיל אדוני מדבר קדש, כל אדוני יחולל הילור ויחשוף יערור ובהיכלו כולו אומר כבוד יעלה לאדוני למבול ישב וישב אדוני מלך לעולם. אדוני עוש לעמו ייתן, אדוני יברך את עמו בשלום. יא לה 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 לה, יא לה 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 לה, יא לה לה turn to page 21, Lechadodi, a piyut that helps us transition from the 6 psalms representing the 6 days, and then following this we'll do the psalm representing Shabbat, and so Lechadodi represents a moment of transition, the in-between period. Lechadodi likrat kala pnei Shabbat nikabela. Lechadodi likrat kala pnei Shabbat nikabela. Shamor v'zachor v'dibor echad hishmiyanu elam yuchad. Adonai echad, u'shemo echad, l'shem u'tifer v'litila. L'echad odi edodi, l'echad odi likra kala, penei Shabbat nikabela. L'echad odi likra kala, Penei Shabbat nikabela. Likrat Shabbat lechu v'nelcha, ki mikor habracha, merosh mikeden nisucha, tov maaseh b'machshavat chila. Lekad odi edodi, lekad odi likra kala. Lechadodi likra kala, penei Shabbat nikabela. Mikdash melech ir melucha, kol mitzei mitoch ha'haficha, rav lak shevet b'yemek habacha, ve'hu yachmol alayichem la. Lechadodi edodi, lechadodi likra kala, penei Shabbat nikabela. Lechadodi likra kala, penei Shabbat nikabela. Hinari me'afar kumi, Lifshi bigdeti partechami, Ayad ben Yishai beit halakmi, Koriva el nafshi gi'ala. Lechadodi edodi, lechadodi likra kala, penei Shabbat nikabela. Lechadodi likra kala, penei Shabbat nikabela. Hitoreri, hitoreri, kiva ore, kumiori, ori, ori, shidaberi, kevod Adonai alayich nigla. Lechadodi edodi, lechadodi likra kala, penei Shabbat nikabela. Lechadodi likra kala, penei Shabbat nikabela. Boi v'shalom ateret bala, gam besimcha uvetzohala, toch emunei absegola, boi chala. Lechadodi edodi, lechadodi likra kala, penei Shabbat nikabela. Lechadodi likra kala, penei Shabbat nikabela. Turn to page 23. We take our seats of Psalm for Shabbat. Mizmor shir, mizmor shir, shir leyom, leyom ha-Shabbat. Mizmor shir, mizmor shir, shir leyom ha-Shabbat. Tov lehodo, lehodo l'Adonai. שמך עליון, להגיד בבוקר חסדך, ואמונתך בלילות. מזמור שיר, שיר ליום השבת. מזמור שיר, שיר ליום השבת. עלי עשור ועלי נבל, עלי היגיון בכינור, כיסא מתני אדוני בפועלך, במעשה ידיך ארנין. מזמור שיר, שיר ליום השבת. מזמור שיר, שיר ליום השבת. מגלו מסך ענני מעולם כל. צדיק אתה מה יפרח, כי ארץ בלבנון יזכה שתולי בבית אדוני, בחצרות אלוהינו יפריחו עוד ינובום בשבע, תשנים ורעננים יהיו להגיד, כי ישר אדוני צורי ולא עוולתה בו. אדוני מלך. עדותיך נאמנו מאוד לברך נאווה קודש, אדוני לאורך ימים. Mourner's Kaddish, page 24. יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה, ביעלמה דברה חירותי וימליך מלכותי, בחייכון וביומכון ובחיי דכל בית ישראל, בעגלה ובזמן קריב יאמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מבורך לעולם מלמי עמיה. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא, ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי לקודשה בריחו, לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה, דאמירן ביעלמה ויאמרו אמן. יהי שלמה רבה מן שמיה, וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ויאמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום. עלינו ועל כל ישראל ויאמרו amen. We ask you to please rise. We turn now to page 28 for the Ma'ariv service with the beginning with Baruch Hu. Be seated. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bivaro malavi v'rachmatu. Elcha v'kayam tamid yimloch aleinu le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai hamariv aravim. Ahavat olam beit Yisrael amcha avta. Torah u'mitzvot chukim u'mishpatim otanu limadita. Al ken Adonai Eloheinu v'shogvenu v'kumenu nasiach b'chut ונשמח בדברי תורתך ובמצוותיך לעולם ועד, כי הם חיינו ויארך ימינו ויארך ימינו, ובהם נגה יומם ולילה, יומם ולילה. ואהבתך אל תסיר ממנו לעולמים, ברוך אתה אדוני אוהב עמו ישראל. שמע ישראל אדוני אלוהינו אדוני אחד. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם לאות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך. והיה אם שמעו את אותה אשר לכם מצוותכם. וחרף על נפשכם ויעצר השמיים ולא ימטה באדמה. Page 32. ומלכותו ורצון קיבלו עליהם משה ובני ישראל, לחנו שירה בשמחה רבה, ויאמרו כולם מי כמוך באלים אדוני, מי כמוך נדר בקודש, נורא תהילה אוסיף אלה, אוסיף אלה. מלכותך ראו בניך, בוקר ילדיני משה, זה לי הנביא אמרו, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. יאללה לה 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 לה, יאללה לה לה לה, יאללה לה 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 לה, יאללה לה 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 לה, יאללה לה 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 לה. ונאמר כי פדה אדוני את יעקב וגאלו מיד חזק ממנו, ברוך אתה אדוני גאל ישראל. Page 33, a request for divine protection. השכיבנו אדוני אלוהינו לשלום, והעמידנו מכנו לחיים. השכיבנו אדוני אלוהינו לשלום, והעמידנו מכנו לחיים. שבת שלומך, ברוך אתה אדוני, הפורש סוכת שלום, עלינו ויכל עמו ישראל, ויה ירושלים, ושמרו בני ישראל את שבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם, ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. בני ובן בני ישראל אותי לעולם, אותי לעולם, אותי לעולם, ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. כי ששת ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ, ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. וביום השביעי שבת וינפש, שבת וינפש, שבת וינפש, ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. יתגדע ויתגדע שמי רבה, יאמר דברה חירותי וימליך מלכותי, בחייכון וביומכון וכידך בית ישראל, בגלה בגלה ובזמן קריב יאמרו, יהי שמי רבה מברך לעולם עולם ימיה. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתעלה, שמי קודשה בריחו לעילה מנחה ברכתה ושירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה, דמירן ביעלמה ויאמרו. The Amidah, the silent text, begins on page 35. Shalom bimromav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu v'yako Yisrael v'yimru amen. Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu v'yako Yisrael. 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 V'yimeru, amen. Shabbat shalom. So the tefillah we just sort of went through silently. Because it's done silently, often it's sort of just skimmed through. But the reality is, you've heard me say many times that without an Amidah, you don't have a service. It is not services which replaced the sacrifice. It is the Amidah which replaced the sacrifices. And as a matter of fact, if you look into the Talmud and you see how it's referenced, it's not called the Amidah, it's called Hatfilah, the prayer. The blessings themselves that comprise the Amidah were given order in the first century, around the year 100 by Rabban Gamliel. But what he did is put together strictly the blessings. So the blessing after the Kedusha, for example, is Baruch Atah Adonai Mekadesh HaShabbat. But what precedes that? On the morning, the Saturday morning, there's 4 paragraphs. Tonight, there's like 2 or 3 paragraphs that precede that blessing itself. Those were individualized. And so what would happen is a person would get up. He knew he had to say the bracha of Mekadesh, who sanctifies Shabbat, and he would improvise into that. With the putting together the Siddur in the 8th century, those blessings ultimately became solidified, and whatever the agreement was, whoever made that agreement, we now have the text as we have today. The sequence of blessings was set in the 1st century. The specifics that surround those blessings probably around the 8th century. So I thought we might do today is take a look at what does the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch offer. I've given you 10. There's a lot more, but I figure 10 sounds like a nice, good number, the 10 Commandments. And so I've given you 10 here, ways in which the tradition suggests the Amidah as the sacrifice, as a replacement for sacrifice, as the core prayer should be recited. So before reciting, number 1, before reciting the Amidah, you should rid yourself of anything that distracts your thoughts. They go so far as to say, this is the time to go to the bathroom. All right, years ago, I led a trip of senior citizens to Spain, and before we went anywhere, who has to go to the bathroom? That's what's going on here. Make sure that all of your needs are taken care of so that when you begin the Amidah, you're ready to go. There'll be no distractions. I'm going to skip the second half because it's actually redundant. It shows up again in number 6. Number 2, when you recite the Amidah, your feet should be placed next to each other as if they were one, only one. Your head should be bent slightly and your eyes closed so that you're not distracted by anything. If you're going to look at the Siddur, you don't take your eyes off the Siddur for any reason. You'll see oftentimes the rabbi covers his head with a talit. It is a way of saying, I am going to avoid all sorts of distractions. And the feet together is a way of saying, I have nothing better to do. This is where my focus is. And this halakha of not moving your feet in the Amidah is so extensive that in traditional conservative synagogues and beyond, once the cantor begins his repetition of the Amidah, he stands with his feet together until he concludes with Sim Shalom at the end. And on high holidays, that can be 2.5 to 3 hours. You don't move your feet. So in congregations where I've been, where I started the Amidah and the rabbi would give his sermon, I stood there and didn't move. I stayed in spot. It's also the reason for why the tradition has arisen, why people come up and help you up. What I would do is when I got to this, since I can't move my feet and I had to turn around and bow, I literally would hop, all right, and I'd bow. Now try getting up without moving your feet. It ain't easy. So people would come up and they'd help you up. So first is getting yourself in a mindset. 2 is arranging things so that you don't have distractions happening around you. Your eyes are closed or focused on the book. 3, your feet are together so that you don't convey that there's something more important that you do. Third, number 3, take care to pray quietly so that only you yourself may hear what you are saying, but that someone next to you should not hear your voice. And this is based on the story of Samuel, where it talks of Hannah. Only her lips moved, but her voice could not be heard. So the tradition is you recite each word with your mouth, but no one near you should hear you. You're replicating Hannah's prayer. Number 4, you're not supposed to lean on anything. Now, the second half of this qualifies that. If you're really ill, this prayer is important enough. Do it sitting down, laying down, do whatever you have to do, but that's if you're ill. Otherwise, you don't lean on anything, you don't go anywhere, etc. 5, you bend your knees. There's 4 times in the Amidah in which we bend our knees. It's Baruch Atah at the beginning, the first bracha. The first bracha is what is known as a closed blessing, meaning it begins with Baruch Atah and it ends with Baruch Atah. It's one blessing enclosed, and so you bend and bow on both of those. By the way, Baruch, why Baruch? Baruch comes from the root word berech. What's a berech? A knee. All right? You're communicating what you're saying. You're acting out what you're saying. You bend your knee. You're describing through your actions. You're acting out, what essentially a sense of hierarchy, of lowering oneself before God. So you do that in those first 2 times. You say Baruch Atah. And then again, when you get to the Modim blessing, Modim Anachnu Lach, we bend, and the blessing that follows right after it, Baruch Atah, we bend our knee and bow once again. But as it says here, do not bow too low, so that your mouth is opposite your belt, because to do so is an act of ostentation. In other words, you fulfill the blessing, but don't convey that I'm holier than you. That's not what's meant to be done here. And you see people oftentimes, they'll stand up sooner than everybody else. They'll bend sooner than everybody else to show, I know more than you. All right? That's exactly what should be avoided. 6, before saying Oseh Shalom, and we bow and take 3 steps backwards in the manner of a king. Before we begin as well as when we end. We take 3 steps forward and then 3 steps back as a way of approaching a king and then leaving the presence of a king. And you start this with your left foot. It sounds kind of random, right? So you start with your left foot. What's the idea? Left, right, left. What's the idea here? The sense is that what you would normally do is as a right-handed person, the tradition was you would step with your right foot normally. This was to convey this is different. And so they go so far as to say, well, if you're left-handed, then you step with your right foot. I'm not sure how that works. I'm not sure that really works. But nonetheless, the intent was to convey that this is different than other settings. Number 7, and it's important, I left out an important word here. When saying Shemona Esrei, you should not speak. You should not signal with your eyes. You should not indicate with your fingers. The tradition is essentially that you cannot communicate with another person for any reason at all during the Amidah. The Talmud goes so far as to say if King David were to approach you and say hello, you may not nod at him, you may not say hello back, you may not in any way indicate that you recognize his presence. You're in God's space at this moment. And so human beings at that point, during this moment, they're expected to know that you are in prayer. The only exception is indeed, they describe, if a foreign king were to do this, then your life might be at risk, and therefore you do that. But short of that, you stay in your place. I know when I davened in the congregation, I would stand next to one of these wood stands because people didn't know, and they would say, can I just get past you? And so I made sure I didn't stand in the way, let them do what they needed to do, so that I wasn't a cause of a burden for them. But the tradition is you don't respond to anyone. Number 8, it is forbidden to sit within 6 feet, 4 amot actually, in front, behind, or alongside of a person who is still praying the Amidah. So if a person near you is still praying and they're within 6 feet of you, you should not sit. It's a way of not making them feel uncomfortable that they should rush through their prayers. They should feel like the community stands around them. And one of my rabbis early in my career had everyone remain standing until he gave the nod, and at the end, and everybody then sit down. But it's a way of conveying to people, take your time, engage in prayer, engage with God. You then have, oftentimes, we have a repetition of the Amidah. And that's a function, a reality of people didn't know the text. Certainly before the printing press, people didn't know the text by heart. And so the cantor would get up, and he would repeat the text, and people would say, Amen. And so as it says here, number 9, upon concluding the silent reading of the Shemona Esrei, the Chazan walks back 3 steps, and then 3 steps forward, and begins in a loud tone, Baruch Atah. Everyone is supposed to sit silently and listen with attention and devotion to the words of the Chazan, not my words as the cantor self-serving, but the words of the Shulchan Aruch. Even studying holy subjects is forbidden during the repetition of the Amidah, and needless to say, therefore, no idle conversations for sure. Certainly prior to the conclusion of Kedusha. When we're saying Kedusha, number 10, commandment number 10, when we recite the Kedusha, everyone, even if you've stepped away, you come back, you do Kedusha, you stand with your feet together. You'll often see me step up at that point and put my feet together. And when we say each of the biblical verses, Kadosh, 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 Baruch Adonai, Baruch Shem Kavod Adonai, Yimloch Adonai Le'olam, at each of those times, we raise up on our toes, in a sense, reaching out to God as we express the words of the biblical text. That gives you a sense. What they're trying to do is create a space that is separate from the rest of the service, a space that is separate from the rest of the world, a space in which we can connect to God without distraction. That is the intent behind all of this. Thoughts, comments? Yes. Okay. Yes, Joyce. Okay, again, look, what I've given you, I've given you a traditional bend. The Shulchan Aruch is a very traditional bend. Let's be real. It comes from the 16th century. All right. Some communities over time have bent certain rules in the same way. I would say to you, if you look in the Shulchan Aruch, I promise you, you'd be sitting off on the side because you're a woman. Okay? And so communities have made adaptations to these rules over time. As I remember my great-grandfather saying to me, he says, my job is to tell you what the text says. Now you do what you need to do. But I have to tell you what the text says. So I'm sharing the wisdom of my great-grandfather in this process. Bob.
6 feet short came in handy, I guess, in the last couple of years.
Right, in the COVID world, it wasn't an issue. You were 6 feet away anyway. Very cool. Very good. Yes, Jerry.
So this is from the person who tried to have come speak to us last weekend.
Right, Rabbi Kula. So Rabbi, yeah, no, you agreed. I understand that. If you were to sit down with Rabbi Kula on one end of the spectrum, and you were to sit down with Rabbi Daniel Gordis on the other end of the spectrum, Rabbi Kula would talk about the rituals themselves don't have much value unto themselves. It's all about the larger picture. Danny Gordis, on the other hand, Rabbi Gordis would say to you the rituals are the be-all and end-all, because oftentimes it's not our ideas that lead to our behaviors. As cognitive dissonance in psychology teaches, it's our behaviors that lead to our attitudes and our thinking. Our behaviors change our thinking. And so he would say to you, the mitzvot, in terms of the actions, are a source of helping us begin to identify our relationship with God. So which is right? I leave it to you. You're right. he and I would sit here and have a lovely discussion and we wouldn't be on the same page. Doesn't mean I'm right. Or wrong, right, exactly. All right. We're going to turn back in our prayer books to page 47. Please rise. The ritual is to rise here. ויחולו השמיים והארץ וכל צבאם ויכל אלוהים ביום השביעי מלאכתו אשר עשה ויפות ביום השביעי מכל מלאכתו אשר עשה ויברך אלוהים את יום השביעי ויקדש אותו כי בו שבת מכל מלאכתו אשר ברא אלוהים לעשות. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו אלוהי אברהם אלוהי יצחק ואלוהי יעקב אלוהי שרה אלוהי רבקה אלוהי רחל ואלוהי לאה האל הגדול הגיבור והנורא העליון קונה שמיים וארץ מגן אבות בדברו מחיה מתים במאמרו האל הקדוש שאין כמוהו המניח לעמו ביום שבת קודשו כי בם רצה להניח להם כי בם רצה להניח להם לפניו נעבוד ברב הפחד ונודה לשמו בכל יום תמיד מן הברכות אל ההודעות אדון השלום מקדש השבת ומברך שביעי ומניח בקדושה לעמדו שני יונג זכר למעשה בראשית אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו רצה במנוחתנו קדשנו במצוותיך ותן חלקנו בתורתך סבנו מטובך ושמחנו בישועתך ותאר ליבנו לעבדך באמת והנחילנו אדוני אלוהינו באהבה וברצון שבת קודשך ינוחו בישראל מקדש שמך ברוך אתה אדוני מקדש השבת יקרא ויקרא שמי רבה מימה דברך חירותי וימליך מלכותי בחייכון ובמכון ובחי לכל בית ישראל בגלה וזמן קריב יאמרו אמן יהי שמי רבה מברך לעולם עולם יומיה יתפרק וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא וירדר יתעלה ויתעלה קודשה בריחו לאל מן כה ברכתה ושירתה תשבחתה ונחמתה דמירן בעלמה ויאמרו תקבל צלות הון ועד הון בכל ישראל קודם אבו הון ושמיה ויאמרו יש להם הרב מן שמיים וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ויאמרו עושה שלום במרומיו הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ויאמרו אמן. Page 49. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'ratzavanu v'shabbat kodesho b'yavahu v'ratzon inchilanu zikaron l'maaseh v'reshit כי הוא יום תחילה למקראי קודש, זכר ליציאת מצרים. כי בנו בחרת, ואותנו קידשת מכהנים, ושבת קודשך באהבה וברצון הנחלתנו. ברוך אתה אדוני מקדש השבת. L'chaim, page 51. עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה ליוצר בראשית, שלא עשנו כגויי הארצות, ולא שמנו רע אדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגורלנו ככל המונם. ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ובודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים, הקדוש ברוך הוא, שהוא נוטה שמיים ויוסד הארץ, ומשה ויקרו בשמיים ממעל, ושכינתו זו בגובה מרומים. הוא אלוהינו אין עוד, מלכנו וזולתו, כך כתוב בתורתו. וידעת יום והשיבות אל לבביך, כי אדוני בשמיים ימעל, ועל הארץ מתחת אין עוד. כן נגאל לך אדוני אלוהינו. ככתוב בתורתך נעים לך לעולם ועד, ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ. ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד, ושמו אחד. May be seated. On this Shabbat, our hearts go out to the families of Jack Laves, Ellis Reshevsky, Paul Mole, and Patsy Sklar. We're observing the yahrzeits of Max Bertman, Gilbert Bettman, Holly Burnett, Meyer Cohen, Becky Cohen, Steve Chaim Kaplan, Earl Dockschlager, Marion Daum, Diane Duplessis, Muriel Duchin, Herta Edelmuth, Bernard Flans, Ralph Flumbaum, Barbara Friedman, Charles Gates, Gwendolyn Gertz, Ernest Getz, David Goodman, Joel Grable, Philip Greenblatt, Tony Ray Holman, Eva Hamori, Peter Hochschild, Marlene Kaplan, Bertha Kohansev, Nora Leff, Julie Markowitz, Albert Oberman, Richard Allen Rolnick, Elaine Friedman Royal, Sarah Sachs, John Jacob Scott, Deborah Ostroff Siegel, Sandra Siegel, Meyer Shatisky, Marvin Slater, Malcolm Slateko, Isaac Stupel, June Tabalski, Melissa Wagner, and Norman Wise. All those in the period mourning, those observing a yahrzeit, we ask you to please rise. Words of Mourner's Kaddish. Yitgadal v'yitgadash shemei Rabbah. V'yalma divrach yirutei v'yamlich malchutei. B'chayechon u'v'yomechon u'v'chayei dechol Beit Yisrael. Ba'agala u'v'zman kari v'yimru amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevorach li'olam elamei amayah. Yitbarak v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yithadar v'yitaleh v'yithalal shemei l'kudeshah b'richu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata. Tushbechata v'nechamata da'amiran v'yalma v'yimru amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya. V'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisroel v'yimru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav. Hu ya'aseh shalom. Aleinu v'al kol Yisroel v'yimru amen. You may be seated. So Rabbi Teller is back from Israel, but this week we have a bat mitzvah at CYJ. Avery Sabloff is there, and so Rabbi is conducting the bat mitzvah there with a lot of our congregants as well. He'll be back next week, Friday night. You'll see we have the return of our Friday night Ruach, so please join us for that. Morning Minyan every morning, Sunday through Friday, 9 o'clock on Zoom in the mornings. Sunday afternoon at 1 p.m., CBS Women are having a nosh and a presentation by Shelley Nadell, who's a certified financial planner on a health-themed program. That's Sunday. Monday night at 7 o'clock, not to be outdone, the Men's Club will be hosting a dinner, and they're meeting here at CBS, and all are welcome to join them. On March 2nd, which is Thursday, we have a new mini-series on Jewish genetics that will be beginning. More information can be found here. More information can be found online as well. Purim is almost here. March 6th, family Megillah reading, magic show, Purim feast. And then for the traditionalists, they'll have the Purim feast followed by the traditional Megillah reading, and then a murder mystery. So come down and be ready for that. Please consider participating in our Mishloach Manot program. It is a mitzvah. One of the 4 mitzvot associated with Purim is to give gifts to friends, and we make that easier through the synagogue, and I encourage you to consider doing so. I think that's, yes? So Mariv will be. So Mariv will be part of the traditional service. It won't be part of the family service. It will begin with Mariv, and during Mariv, the Megillah is read as part of the Mariv service itself. There'll be Mourner's Kaddish there, yes. All right. Look forward to Rabbi Teller's return. It'd be a pleasure to have him back on the Bima. You can hear his voice instead of mine next week. It'd be again a pleasure. We're going to conclude with Hatikva, page 395. We ask you to please rise. O Lord, Baleva Pnima, Nefesh Yehudi Homia, O Fateh Mizra Kadima, Ayin Letzion Sophia, O Lord, Tikvatenu, Hatikva Bachnot Abayim, Liotam Chov Yerushalayim liot achofshi be'artzeinu Eretz Zion Yerushalayim. Please find someone with whom to extend blessings. Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha Ya'er Adonai panav elecha v'yichunecha Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. Shabbat shalom.